Hello and welcome to a now community event. Today's is going to be ITBM at Demand Management. We're just going to take a few moments to pause and wait for more attendees to join. Okay, as we wait for more people to join, I'd just like to tell everyone that I have put into the chat window today the ITB forum on the community so that you can subscribe to that forum and receive event updates directly to your inbox, as well as you can always come back and post questions. I'll make sure that I give the link in a moment into that chat window. And we're just still waiting for more attendees to join. And if you have questions, please do use the Q&A the feature and function of the Zoom webinar. We also have a poll that is open and available for you all to answer. So we appreciate you taking the time to do so. Okay. Well, this is going to be recorded, and the on-demand version of this recording today will be available on that community link. So I will also put that into the window just to make sure that everyone has it. Okay, and with that, since we're 1 minute past the hour, so Deborah, want to take it away?
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks everyone for joining us. My name is Deborah McGrath, and I'm a Senior Technical Product Marketing Manager with ServiceNow, and I'll be hosting the Demand Management webinar today. And joining me will be two of my colleagues, Blair LaCour and John Hose, who are both ServiceNow Advisory Solution Consultants with our IT Business Management practice. John is a subject matter expert across all our ITBM applications, and he'll be our lead speaker. He'll also do a live demand management demo, and Blair, who's also another ITBM SME, will add his own expert commentary throughout the webinar as well. So our agenda today includes taking a look at the many different types of demand. John will then consider how that demand is processed, including assignment groups, keeping stakeholders informed, assessing and prioritizing demand, streamlining approvals, and he'll talk about how ideation fills in as well, or fits in, excuse me. John will then do a demo which will highlight the core features of demand management. So before we begin, I'd like to point out that this presentation may contain forward-looking statements that reflect the current beliefs of ServiceNow, all based on current information available. And all these forward-looking statements should not be relied upon in making purchasing decisions. So following this and following the demo, we'll also wrap up with a list of demand management resources, and then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end as well. So John, without any further ado, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Deborah. And I'd like to start, we have 2 short poll questions available for attendees to take. So if you'd like to access that and fill in your answers, we'd be very interested to hear what people are currently doing for demand management and what most interests you in demand management. And while you're filling those answers in, we can begin. So we're going to start by discussing the different types of demand. So within the ServiceNow platform, we have the concept of unified demand intake, but the fact that you're sort of unifying and centralizing that intake process doesn't mean that you're going to treat all demands equally. Deborah, if you want to move forward.
I'm having challenges with my mouse here, John, so I'm bear with me 1 second.
No worries. One of the things that we'll see when we get into the demo portion is that you can basically, again, leverage the platform, the process flows, dependent fields to help you categorize, route, and drive demand automatically. So some of this will have to do with basically saying, what is the basic category of the request that's coming in? You know, is this a large project? Is it, you know, a new product, something that may have to go to the PMO that's going to have to go through a very rigorous process with approvals and assessments and building out a business case? Or is it a smaller demand item, a defect, an enhancement, a change, something where you might say, we're going to have configured in a process for those types that's going to be more streamlined. It may even route directly to a support team that's merely going to manage it as part of their overall backlog, or do some more basic prioritization around things like impact and priority. Additionally, you can capture categories of demand around things like, is this strategic or operational work? These might be called differently in your organization. Sometimes it's transformative work or grow work, versus keep the lights on or sustain. But you can use these categorizations to help you, again, prioritize and route that demand. You may say that operational work, again, are things that we'll just sort of manage differently from strategic work, where we'll want a higher threshold for that work to move forward. You're going to want to prioritize whatever you are moving forward to things like strategies and goals. The ServiceNow platform allows you to make sure that the work that you're going to execute is aligned to the overall goals of the company or the business unit requesting it. This is important because in many organizations, when we're getting multiple requests, we don't really have a way to necessarily understand what is more important. And sometimes then it will come down to just, who is screaming the loudest right now, or who is the most senior person asking for something. But that's not necessarily going to align with the work that's going to provide the best return on investment to the organization. And one other thing to note is that the overall process can be similar for these different types of demand, these different categories, and will seem sort of unified to the user, even though on the back end, you may have different business rules that are applying. So again, we're going to have that unified intake without necessarily needing to create multiple custom processes, even though we will be treating these records differently, because again, a small defect needs a different handling than a large new project. Assignment groups. So how do we determine where we're going to send our requests? Once we've taken our work in and categorized and prioritized it, we need to understand, well, who's going to do this work? So part of the process has to involve assigning that work out. Now, some of the things to know in terms of best practice: assignment groups don't necessarily map one-one to your organizational structure. And this is because the assignment group really needs to be based on who is doing that work. So again, if you had, defects coming in, you may have certain, developers or agile teams, but that work might get routed to just a subset of those, developers or agile teams based on who is it that supports this application. And those people might not all report up to the application owner. They might be centralized resources, but we'd want to sort of have that routing be based on who's going to execute that work. It's not going to be based on sort of the overall HR structure of sort of who that person's manager is. We also want to make sure that we right size our assignment groups. Again, this is, essentially saying we want to hit that Goldilocks zone. Who is doing the work, and how do we get it small enough that we neither want to be assigning work to an overly large group. We wouldn't say, well, if a project comes in, just assign it to a group that is every PM at our organization, because they're not going to know who should pick it up. That's not going to be efficient. Similarly, you don't want a group that is too small. You wouldn't want to have an assignment group that only has 1 or 2 people in it, because that then becomes a single point of failure. If one person is out and there are only 1 or 2 people in a group, then that's reduced by 50% or even potentially 100%. It wouldn't make sense to have a group that small. So normally you want to be basically saying, how am I grouping my work? What are the groups that actually execute this work, so that we know how we're going to assign it? And the group is not always necessary. Again, there will be some work that's just going to go into a backlog and will sort of be picked up by the next person based on the way the work is managed. Again, sometimes things like defects and things like that may be managed that way, where they'll just go into sort of a centralized backlog of work, and the next developer who is on duty will just pick it up. They don't all have to go to sort of a specific group and have sort of a specific named person assigned to them. And then the other thing to note is, again, with the platform's automation features, you can automate a lot of this. You can build in rules to say, well, when this work gets to a certain point, and again, it can be different based on, is this a request for a new project, a defect, something like that. We should route the work and the platform will just assign it appropriately. It can just put it in that backlog. It can, send it to the PMO for approval, or assign it to other work groups that you've defined. That doesn't have to be something that's done manually. Stakeholders. So one of the other things we'll see within the demo is that, as we're taking in work, managing our work, there are obviously going to be stakeholders across the business. These might be subject matter experts. They might be people within various business groups that want to track that work, understand what's happening. So the things to think about there, again, you need to really consider who should our stakeholders be, essentially why are they a stakeholder? There are different ways to provide people visibility to work, and not everyone who wants visibility is going to be a stakeholder. If you're doing work for an internal business unit or even external clients, there may be a lot of people that you would put on the sort of watch list for this work just so that they can sort of track the progress of it, but they wouldn't actually be a stakeholder. A stakeholder is usually going to be someone who's providing some kind of input. Maybe they're managing, or taking assessments about the work. They might have some approval rights. They're really someone who's going to have some kind of decision-making power. You do also need to think about how many stakeholders you're going to have. Again, there can be different ways to identify them. Sometimes you may identify stakeholders based on, a portfolio of work where you'd say, well, we have a set group of stakeholders for this portfolio. It may be unique stakeholders to a particular initiative, but you don't want to, again, if you say, well, we have 100, stakeholders who are going to be involved in something, that may be too many. So you don't want, again, everyone to be a stakeholder, because that's just going to slow down the process. If you have to have 100 people approving or taking assessments and everyone is going to have their say, it's going to be very difficult to get anything done. You also need to think about, when are we going to engage with the stakeholders? So again, the platform can guide you in that process. You can set up different touch points, and automate that. So we don't necessarily need stakeholders to be notified of everything that happens. There's going to be a lot of minor internal work they don't need to see. We want to engage with them when we're hitting those big inflection points, those big decisions. Are we approving this to move forward for execution? Do we think this business case justifies the return on investment we think we're going to get? Would we make, this expenditure of money in order to begin work? So think about when and where you're engaging with them, because again, if you sort of engage with them constantly and they constantly have to approve each little step or review every piece of work, that's going to slow the process down and is probably not a value add to the stakeholders or to the people executing the work. Are they all equal? So again, there will be some stakeholders where you may want them to be more involved or essentially weight their input higher than others. This could be things, if there is a business sponsor for an initiative, they probably are in the end going to have the final say. We want to maybe grab information, input from other stakeholders, but again, the person who may be essentially signing the checks or is the primary beneficiary, this could be a CXO within your organization. They may be someone you want to pay more attention to or essentially weight their input higher than others. And again, make sure that they're seeing the right things. You can control not just when are they engaged, but also what are they seeing. You don't necessarily want to reveal everything within, a project to a stakeholder, because again, there's a lot of that back end work that they just don't need to see. It's just going to be more noise and confusing to them. You want to make sure that the information they are seeing is, again, key to the decisions that they have to make throughout the process. Assessments. So when I was talking about stakeholders, you heard me mention assessments. So why do we have assessments? How can they be used? So this is core platform functionality that we can leverage within the demand management process, and they're going to help us in prioritizing that demand. So you configure when are assessments triggered, why are they triggered. You're not necessarily going to want to use them for everything. Again, if you're taking in, say, a defect, you don't necessarily need to have a full assessment on that defect to say, well, what's the, value of this defect to the business, what's the risk of this defect, that's more work than, most defects are probably going to be worth. You're probably going to just stick to more of a simple, prioritization based around what's the impact, how many users is this impacted? Can we just confirm that, yes, this is a defect, it wasn't user error, and then you'll backlog and address it that way. Assessments will be used more on larger initiatives, projects, new product introductions, things where you are, again, want to get that stakeholder input to say, how do we think this is going to impact our bottom line? Do we believe that the benefits that have been outlined, maybe we're saying we're going to increase revenue or decrease costs, how strongly do we think we can achieve this? And we want to then use this assessment information to help us prioritize those demands and essentially get to a point where we're comparing apples to apples. So it becomes another way that we can then understand the relative value of the initiatives that we may be considering. They're going to see, when we go through the demo, you see how we can use these to score the demand overall. So assessments can be one of those inputs. We're obviously going to look at, what financial information do we have on, this demand, have we said what sort of size of effort we think this is, but we can use that assessment information to help us score the demand. So we can have our key stakeholders provide input that will actually drive a scoring matrix within the demand process to, again, help us get to sort of a more neutral value of these initiatives, again, rather than just relying on, who happens to be screaming the loudest at any given time, or who was the most senior person who made a request, and prioritizing it that way. And then the last item is, again, you can tailor the assessments to your business needs. What we're going to see is a basic out-of-the-box assessment that is based around value and risk. But these are things that our clients would configure the questions that are asked based on the way you manage demand internally and what's most important to your business. And that's going to change based on the industry you're in and what sort of work you're managing. Approvals. So we want to get stakeholder assessment, stakeholder input. We may also have, again, internal, external stakeholders that need to execute approvals as part of this process. These could, again, be some of the, the business stakeholders, people like that, who are giving final sign off to say, yes, I approve of this work. I believe this will meet my needs. It may be other internal stakeholders to the process, financial controllers who may need to, review a cost plan and say, yes, this aligns with, our internal business rules, or portfolio owners who may be looking at this work to say, yes, I would approve this to move forward. I don't have any qualms about us taking this work on. Again, it's something that should be used judiciously. If you have too many approvals, that's going to slow down the process. As with stakeholders and assessments, you really need to think, why am I executing this approval? Is it really necessary? Am I sending this approval to the right person? And am I asking for this approval at the right point in this process? You can define different approvals for different types of work. And again, this is something where you may not have any approvals for smaller work items, defects and changes. Some of those you might just say, we're going to, have a pre-configured process for those. We know how to manage them, and we essentially can automate them. It just has to hit certain thresholds, and we consider that auto-approved. Other things like projects, product initiatives, we will need some approvals. We're going to need that review of business cases, of financial estimates, of resource plans to say, yes, we can take this work on, we'll move it forward. We can also have SLAs around our approvals. So again, another platform feature is to have service level agreements. We don't want approvals that are sent out and then end up holding the process up, even if we have the right number of approvals at the right time, because someone is out, someone's on vacation, or they just are ignoring that message. So you can have the platform actually manage that process. You can have an SLA where that user would be reminded that they have an approval that's waiting for them. And you could then also have a point at which point the platform would essentially automate the action. And that could either be, you might say, well, after 5 business days, if there hasn't been a response, we'd consider that an auto approval and essentially move the work forward. Or we could consider it an auto rejection and say, well, if we haven't heard anything, we'll assume this work can't move forward. You also can set up delegates so that if someone is out on, leave or something like that, then there can be someone else who might execute those approvals in their stead, so that obviously you don't want that to hold up the process. And the platform can also provide status notifications. So again, in terms of stakeholders, in terms of people who might be watching, you're going to be able to see where in the approval process is this piece of work, has that approval been granted or not, and you can also configure the platform to proactively notify people to say, yes, this has been approved, so that they know, we can begin that work, we can move to the next step, or no, the work was not approved, and if that was sort of a full, no, just stop at, you're not going to be able to move forward, or if it's more sort of a soft no, we can't approve this, we need additional information, you need to do some rework, but we'd still consider it. So just go back and essentially redo some of that work and then continue through the process. Leveraging ideas. So within the demand management space on the ServiceNow platform, we also have the concept of ideation, and as of the New York release, innovation management, to formalize that process even more. So ideas sometimes actually scare some of our clients, the possibility of just sort of opening up the voice of the customer to ask, for, essentially any unformed request they might want can seem, a little daunting at first. How would we manage that? Would there be an expectation that we're going to provide everything that's asked for? But there really is a benefit. It really does provide that early demand pipeline, and again, that insight into what is being requested. Very often what will happen is when we have sort of too formalized of a process, we essentially end up in scenarios where we sort of say, we had 100 projects we needed to execute this year, we executed 100 projects, therefore we completed 100% of the work, and everyone should be happy. And yet we are getting complaints from the business because really that 100 projects only represented 10% of the work they actually would have liked to have done. And we don't have insight into that, and that becomes a problem. So we do need to use this and make it clear that, submitting an idea doesn't necessarily mean that it will be accepted, but it does give us that insight into the voice of the customer and what work is out there that we may not be addressing. That allows us to then go back and have more of a clear discussion with our business stakeholders or internally around things like resourcing and budgeting. Again, if we're not measuring that work and we're just, executing what is sort of official, if we say we're completing 100% of the work, people may not be happy, but we're not going to get any additional funding or resources in future years to do additional work because officially we're meeting the full demand. If we can say, well, we've done 100% of what was approved, but there was 90% more work out there that we weren't able to get to, that could then justify saying we need additional funding, we need additional resources, there's a greater need here that's been identified. We can also leverage this process to help deflect work. So one of the other problems many of our clients have when they don't have sort of a formalized process for this is that people they go and ask whoever they can for help. They basically try to leverage their personal relationships to get things done quickly. And that can often then lead to duplicative efforts that we don't have insight to. I want something done quickly, so I'm just going to go and ask everyone I know to get it done, and I'll assume someone will get it to me first. Meanwhile, that's a waste of overall resources. So we can use this ideation process to identify some of those duplicates and even use it to direct people to self-serve resources. People might be submitting a request, and as they're entering it, again, the platform can leverage, the platform knowledge base, some of the machine learning capabilities to say, look, you're asking for something, and we think that these options may already be in place, already in the pipeline, and perhaps you just want to essentially, upvote someone else's idea, add your own comments there, or we could even be directing you to a solution that already exists. So they're going to help us, improve that communication with our clients, improve that feedback, and help us review these requests quickly and make determinations about what we're actually going to move forward. Okay, and with that, I'm going to say, I think we'll come back to the summary at the end. Right now, I think we should move into the demo. So Deborah, if you don't mind, I'm going to start to share out my screen.
That'll be good. I'll stop sharing, John. And I know some, in the meantime, I just wanted to mention that the polling results, we've been sharing them. So pretty interesting. It seems like a lot of people are in the middle of doing demand, right? But most of them do have a demand management process, but the biggest 31% lack the traceability between, you know, the process, the initial request, through ongoing operations. And then the second, again, the most is they have a central point of demand, and they do have a comprehensive centralized view of demands in their status. So it's nice to see that a lot of people have a demand management process. And then the second poll, it looks like everybody's interested in everything we're talking about. So that's a good thing.
Okay. So where I'm starting is actually with ideation. That's sort of the beginning of our process potentially. Again, not every client will leverage this, but if you do choose to use this, it's a way to capture that voice of the customer. And this can be something that we've provided access to off of a centralized portal. So again, we can have that central location people can be going to request help or submit their ideas. One thing I will note is that what I am showing, Deborah gave that safe harbor notice at the beginning. This is the New York release, so this is all looking at current functionality that is available today. We won't be showing anything from any of our upcoming releases today. But what we see here as of the New York release is our ability to basically capture those ideas and then crowdsource them. So if I'm coming in as a potential user, I can see other ideas that have already been submitted. I can see where they are in the process. You know, some are being reviewed, some are actually in development, some have been planned. And I can also see how they've been voted on. So we can have an ability to upvote ideas. You know, I might come in here and I can see that Troy has already submitted a request to add, you know, a reward tracking to our travel app. Maybe that's what I was going to ask for as well. And rather than submitting a duplicate idea, I could just go in and say, I want to vote for this idea and, you know, have my voice added to it. You'll see that when I first came in, this was red. I had previously actually downvoted it, which is also why we jumped from 7 to 9, because we changed my negative vote to a positive vote. I could further go in and, you know, I could add comments to this idea. So again, anyone could come in and add commentary to the idea. They might want to add additional details, additional thoughts. And again, this just becomes a way to help capture that voice of the customer, see that there might be sometimes unmet needs within your space. You know, sometimes when individuals just come up and they ask for the same thing one at a time, it seems minor and unimportant and not something worth investing in. But if you see that actually, wait, maybe this is something that actually impacts a large number of people, you know, everyone is saying this would be a good idea, that can raise, you know, that to a higher level that then you do want to take action on. If we did need to submit our own new idea, we could come in and add, you know, an idea directly. You know, the platform, again, we can set, you can see these little red asterisks. We're going to configure what information is required. Again, what we're showing you is the basic out-of-the-box form, so it is fairly simplistic. But ServiceNow is highly configurable, so you could add additional information here you would want to capture, or you could change which fields are required. So for our purposes, we'll just add in a webinar test idea. And here we can see where the platform, again, is trying to help us by showing us things that may match this. This is that first deflection step. So we can see there are already some other ideas that may have been submitted that we might want to just link onto. If this did match one of them, we might not submit this idea, and instead we could again go and just add comments to or upvote another idea. We might even find, again, that that idea is already in process or had been approved. You know, it could be that there's a solution that's on the way and, you know, we're not going to need to do anything more here. If we were going to continue, the next step would be to provide what we thought was our initial categorization of the idea. Again, you can define these categories. So here we might say, you know, is this a request for a new project? It might be a process improvement. We can also define subcategories, child categories. So under process improvements, we could say, well, is this, you know, cost savings or is this risk mitigation? Again, these are things that we might be using to route this work. So you can set up those business rules, that process flow on the platform, and we might have this idea routed to a different assignment group based on the type of request that was being made. Project requests might be going to the PMO, other process or product requests might be sent to different teams or groups that are going to have the knowledge needed to sort of evaluate this and provide feedback. We also can select multiple categories. So here I'll say, perhaps I am doing cost savings, but I think that it will be accomplished by retiring or decommissioning an old application that we no longer need. So this again just provides a way to gather more information and help us more quickly evaluate this request. We're then going to ask, obviously, for some information from the client. Please describe what it is you're asking for. And we can also give them the ability to add attachments. This could be a screenshot, a document, a PDF, something that might support their request. And once they've completed this, they'll hit create to submit that idea formally. And this is then going to be where they can come back and track this idea. So they could have an ability to go back and look at all the ideas they've submitted, see what the status is. And again, we also could have platform notifications that might be letting them know, here's a confirmation that we received your idea is under review, and then eventually saying, was it accepted? It was backlogged, it's been approved. We don't necessarily have to have the client coming back here. Other clients could now come in and they could add their own commentary. We can add additional commentary. We might choose that we want to edit or even delete the idea. The one thing we can't do is we cannot upvote or downvote our own idea. It's going to assume that we are obviously supporting what we've submitted, and we can't essentially stuff the ballot box there. When we continue on, now we're sort of on the internal side of the ServiceNow platform. We're basically going to go and pick up this idea and move it through the process and see some of the other features that we talked about. So here I'm opening up a demand manager dashboard. This might be where I start my day so I can track work that's coming into the process. And I'm going to be able to see things like, how many ideas have been submitted recently, how many ideas are in process, what the forecast cost of that work looks like. And again, some of that categorization of work that we're going to see a little later when we look at the records as we move them through the process. Is it strategic versus operational, things like that. If I wanted to see the idea I just submitted, everything in ServiceNow is live. So I can click through from that dashboard to see, show me the ideas that have just been submitted, and we can see the test idea that we just submitted a moment ago is at the top of our list. So we might go in there to pick up and review new ideas that come in and take action on them. Do we want to approve these? Do we need to go back to the requester and ask for additional information? Or do we even need to reply to the requester? Again, maybe there is, a solution they weren't aware about or something like that, and we're just going to direct them elsewhere. Another way to engage with our ideas would be through our visual task board. So this is, again, platform functionality where rather than looking at our ideas as a list, we can see them in more of a sort of almost a Kanban style board, so that we can look at where is the work within the process. So we can see what ideas have been submitted, what ideas are in the backlog, any work that's been completed or planned. And again, we can still open these ideas directly, see whatever was submitted by the requester, and we could work on the request from here as well. So this is just another way to engage with that work rather than going through the standard list view. From here, we also even have the ability to just drag and drop. So if we had reviewed this idea and wanted to accept it, we could simply move it forward and say, well, we do want to put this into our backlog so we can continue the work. We are going to see, again, the platform process flows are going to manage that work for us. So here it's telling us that we've said we want to accept this idea, but we haven't said how we want to route it. So we need to create a task related to the idea. So essentially the platform is going to have those guardrails up. So even if we don't remember to take action, the platform will remind us to do so. So in this case, I'm going to say I want to create a demand. We'll move the work forward that way. But we could choose to go directly to project, or we might be moving this forward, and saying it's an epic, it's a story, it's a feature. You again can configure, what values and options would be provided here. But when we move this forward as a demand, we're now going to see that a new demand record was successfully created, and this would move it forward to the next part of the process. This might even be a point where we may switch assignment groups. It could be that you have an initial group that's going to pick up work when it comes in and has to do that initial review of the idea and make a decision about how the work should move forward. And at this point, the work might have been assigned to now another group that's going to move it through the demand process more formally. Here, we're now going to switch and pick up that demand record. So again, the record that was just created is now in our list of demands that we have to manage. And we're going to have to fill out some additional information for it. So again, one of the first things we can see, we talked about categorizing demand and using that to route work. So here we've seen that this is being categorized as strategic and as a potential project. But we might say maybe this is actually an operational request. And again, we can see that if we make this operational, we now have different options. We'd say, well, if it's operational, it's going to be a change or a defect. We can also see that the platform is saying that this is now a mandatory value, but we have to change the value because we can't have, in our case, an operational project. Again, this is logic that you can configure. You may have different categories you want to capture. You may just refer to these by different names. You may have different types of work that you want to define, and you may want to align those differently. And you could have obviously even, more than two options here, leading to essentially additional sub options. But this becomes one of the first ways where we're then going to be setting, what is going to happen to this piece of work as it goes through the process. If it's a defect, it might just quickly move forward, be assigned to a support team. If it is a project, it's going to go through more of those steps and have assessments and approvals that we're going to need to execute. So in our case, we will say that this is going to be a strategic project, and we will continue to move it forward that way. We can further add some other details in terms of our requests that we might be using to guide it through the process. These can be things like aligning it to a portfolio or program, having certain investment classes, and again, obviously capturing some information around what department is making the request. Some of this can be filled in automatically. We could base, the department and business unit around who the requester was and have the platform just autofill that in for us. One of the items we discussed earlier, though, was stakeholders. So I do want to show you how we could have, the platform automatically fill in our stakeholders. And this is just one way of doing this. So we're going to see in our record that currently we don't have any stakeholders defined. If we go to look at our list of stakeholders, we could go and add an existing stakeholder or create a new stakeholder. But again, we can leverage platform business logic to fill this in. So here, I'm going to assign this to a particular portfolio of work. And when I save that change based on the portfolio, the platform is going to know that it should add these 4 stakeholders. So we've added in the portfolio manager, we've added in a business relationship manager who's aligned to that portfolio, we've added in the PMO director, and we have an executive sponsor related to that portfolio. So the platform knows who should be aligned to this piece of work automatically, so we don't have to do that. We do still have the ability, sometimes there will be exceptions or specific pieces of work where we might need to add an additional stakeholder, so we could still add an ad hoc stakeholder or create a new stakeholder record. We're also going to see that within our stakeholders, we're going to be able to capture what's their level of influence, what's their level of interest, and how do they engage with us? Are they someone who's generally supportive, resistant, or neutral? Again, this gets back into information we may want to track internally. We obviously don't necessarily want to reveal this to the stakeholders themselves, especially if they're people we consider resistant, but it can be useful to understand sort of what sort of response we may be getting from the people we do have to engage with as we move the work through the process. We also can see who have we defined as being an approver, someone who we may seek approval for as we move through the process, and who have we identified as potential assessment recipients. Again, using that, as we discussed, we don't necessarily need everyone to get assessments. We don't necessarily need everyone to be approvers. We're not going to have everyone in this process take an assessment when we move forward to that point. One other thing that I mentioned, and just to call out here, is that we do have the ability to add people to the watch list. So we may have people who are interested in the work. They don't have to be a stakeholder. We know that we have a business stakeholder that's been identified, the executive sponsor for the portfolio. There may be people on her team who also need insight into this work, but they're not a formal stakeholder. They're not going to approve the work. They're not going to take assessments on the work. We could add them in here to this watch list so that they'd be able to see high-level information on the project. If it was someone, perhaps again from the business side, who did need to see project details, again, actually see the notes, the specific notes we'd be adding as we would do that work, we could add them to the work notes list. That would then allow them to see that greater level of detail. Again, this is something you want to use judiciously, and you'd certainly want to make sure that if you do have people on the business or client side who can see the work notes, that you're not entering anything you wouldn't want that client to see. You'd want to make sure you're maintaining that level of professionalism. But let's move this request forward and trigger an assessment. So again, we can set when we want the assessment to happen within the process. We may want to have we could have multiple assessments. In this case, we're going to have assessments happen when we reach screening. So we'll add a bit of information that we may need beforehand. So we might, obviously in order to assess this, we'd say we need to know when we think we're going to do the work. We're going to look at our assessment data here. We may initially want to provide, an estimate of what we think the work size is to help guide someone. Do we think this is going to have a high, medium, or low impact? And we might do an initial sort of high-level t-shirt size. We haven't done anything formal, but we think this is going to be an extra large initiative. And obviously, we're not going to go through everything we would do within the demand process today. We would fill in our full business case. We might link this to particular strategies and goals that are going to help us make a determination about this. And we would fill in our financial information. We would do some initial cost estimates, some additional resource estimates that might be required to help our stakeholders, do that assessment on value and risk. But for our purposes, we'll save what we've done and we will move this request forward. So we've submitted this, and now we're going to say that we want to screen this record. So when we move to screening again, if we go back to our stakeholders, we see that Megan is our assessment recipient. So we're actually just going to sort of switch our role here. We're now going to be Megan Burke. She's the portfolio owner. She's the one who will have to take the assessment for the effort we're moving forward. We can see that Megan is going to have her own view. She can have her own dashboard. She'll have a different view of work than our demand manager may. And she would probably have received a notification. It could be an in-platform notification. It could be a notification via email, a notification on her mobile device that would tell her, there's a piece of work that requires your input and you have an assessment to take. When she comes in, she's going to be able to see, what are all of the assessments that she has available to her. Again, the platform is also going to tell her she has one around, two-factor authentication for fraud mitigation that's overdue. And she has some other around some operational cost reductions and compliance work that she needs to take as well. So this again gets back into that. We can have SLAs around approvals, around assessments. Megan may be getting notifications on this. You have so many days to complete this assessment. And at a certain point, then it might, say, well, because you haven't done that, we're just going to move this work forward and assume that you are, okay with it, or it would consider lack of a response to be a negative. But let's go in and take the assessment that we've gotten for our webinar test request. So again, this layout is a basic out of the box layout. You can configure this. You might want to change the questions that are being asked. You might want different values. You might want to look at completely different things than just high-level strategic alignment and risk. We do have a link back to the request, so Megan could go and open it up. She again might want to obviously look at that request, review the financials, review the business case, make sure that she understood everything before she filled out the assessment. In this case, we're looking for basically just provide some, quick on a range of 1 to 10. How well does this align to, our strategic initiatives? Will it increase job efficiencies? Will it improve processes? Does it provide any competitive advantage? And she's going to provide, her subject matter expertise to provide feedback on that, and then in terms of risk, are there any time delays? Does this fulfill regulatory and compliance needs? Again, often if we're doing work related to that, we might consider that higher risk because there may be more rules we have to follow, or there may be greater risks if we fail to achieve the initiative successfully. Does it require additional infrastructure or business expansion? What are we going to input into this request, in order to achieve it? Is it very, high intensity, or is it something that we can do relatively quickly? And are there any significant dependencies? Again, something that is quick and standalone is going to be obviously less risky than, say, a project that might have multiple dependencies potentially to other projects and initiatives. And once she's completed that, she will submit her answers. She's going to get a note that she has completed the assessment. And if we now go back to our record, we will also get notification that Megan has updated the assessment for our initiative. So we can see Megan Burke has modified this field. This was done automatically as a result of her filling in the assessment. So again, the platform will manage that change. Here in our demo, we're only asking for a single assessment. We might require all of the stakeholders to provide an assessment on this before we are going to seek approval. And the platform would then, average their scores together. The other thing that we can have happen in terms of automating the process, we'll see that we are in screening still if we look at the top of our record, but I'm just going to reload the page because the act of completing the assessment has actually moved our record to qualified. So this was considered an assessment and an approval at the same time. So once all the assessments have been completed, we essentially have now been moved forward to a qualified state. So again, we can build those business rules in and have the platform take some of those actions for us without us having to do anything. So this work will just move forward on that basis. And the last item that we can look at today is then our demand workbench. So we talked about we want to compare apples to apples. We want to execute assessments and approvals. We want to leverage our stakeholders. This is going to allow us, we can see our webinar test ideas here based on the feedback that we got, and we can compare this to other work that we have in the process. So rather than making a decision about what we're going to execute based on, well, who's asking for it or who went, to the people they know to get the work in ahead of the process, or who's simply screaming the loudest, we're going to have more of a, we're looking at this, we're looking at risk and value, or we're, whatever matrix we're using at your organization to track the work. And we're going to have a clear way to say these initiatives are high value to the organization and we should move forward with them. We have other initiatives that are low value and we don't want to execute them. And then we have, other initiatives that are sort of straddling the line. We want to consider them. Maybe they can be moved forward, maybe it's not worth it compared to everything else, or maybe there are places where if we review them, we might be able to find efficiencies and we might be able to move them, by changing scope, changing timelines to make them more valuable to the organization. Additionally, from here, we could go, we could be doing a review live. We might want to go and look at these demand records again, which would take us back to that underlying record so we can look at the detail, look at what was that business case, what were the financials, or we might make a decision to say, we do want to approve this for execution, and we're going to move this forward and create a project from it. So this allows us to, again, take all of that output, visualize it, and then make more balanced decisions about what work we want to take into the process. So with that, I want to pause, and Deborah, if you'd like to start sharing again, I think we can wrap up and then open it up for questions.
Okay. I think that'd be easy. Here we go. Okay. Here we go. So yeah, John, thanks so much for that great presentation and demo, and really thought of a lot of the key elements to consider to be successful with ServiceNow Demand Management. I thought what I'd do is let you summarize, and then Blair and I would like to do a couple things, identify some resources to support this, some white papers, videos that people can take a look at, as well as open it up for Q&A. So John, I'll just let you summarize first.
Sure. So hopefully in what we reviewed, you saw how the demand process can help you manage that overall process and align your work better. We looked at, how can we categorize our demand? That's sort of the first step. While we did only follow one work type, we obviously could have other work types that are going through the process simultaneously, and they might have different milestones that they're going to hit. Some of them will have assessments and approvals, others will not. Some of them may just have them in different places. Some of the work will be routed to different teams for management. We talked about assignment groups and how that work can be assigned and routed. We talked about stakeholders, how they can be added, how that's going to provide them insight into the demand, and how not everyone has to be a stakeholder. Some people are just going to be on watch lists so that they can get insight, while stakeholders are going to be the ones that we want executing those approvals, executing those assessments. We actually went through an assessment and saw how that can work. Again, that was a basic out-of-the-box version, but this is something that our clients leverage in the real world to help them understand and make decisions about the work that they're going to move forward. And even, we could have gone through a scenario where that work was rated very poorly and we would have made a decision not to proceed with it because our stakeholders were saying there was no value in that work. We want to streamline our approvals. Again, some of that has to do with making sure we're only asking the right people for approvals, and some of it can be having the platform manage that work for us. That doesn't have to be a two-step process. We might, as we saw in this example, say, well, once all the assessments are completed, we would consider that approval to move forward to the next stage for review on whether or not that work is going to be executed. And we began within our idea space, the innovation management portal, in terms of that ability to leverage ideas. We can capture the voice of the customer. We can use that to deflect potential work that we don't need to take in, deflect duplicate requests. We can help it identify what workload we may have coming for us and have that feed in those trends that we could see in that reporting and that dashboard we started with. How much demand do we have coming in? What could this potentially be costing us? All of that can be used to, again, help make arguments about, do we need more or less investment? Are we meeting our goals that we have set with what we have now, or do we need to realign?
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. So without that, in our last few minutes, I'd like to point out some of the resources that we have, including links to an overview of ServiceNow, the ServiceNow Demand Management solution, a white paper or data sheet about our demand management solution, as well as a video that really focuses on the demand workbench and all the capabilities we provide. In addition, we also have a link at the bottom to our community site, but I'll call your attention to the chat window where Lisa has posted links to the community site. And I'd love to encourage everyone to subscribe to the ITBM forum on the ServiceNow community, where you'll be able to access this demand management webinar, as well as any upcoming webinars in the last Thursdays with ITBM webinar series. As a matter of fact, our next webinar will be held on March 26th. It will be an overview of what's new in ITBM with the Orlando release. So I'd love to encourage everybody to join us for that. I'd also love to ask Blair to chat a little bit about, we have some special webinars happening throughout the month of March on Wednesdays. Blair, did you want to make mention?
Yeah, thanks, Deborah. And John, thanks for that great demo. Next week, I'm going to be doing a demonstration on managing projects in the hybrid world. So what John showed us today is how the demands can come in and route to different places. Once we get to execution, we're going to be able to deliver in a traditional waterfall type of project, but then what we're seeing from a lot of our customers today is that's for your today, and how can you evolve to be an agile organization. So we're going to look at how Scrum can be in that hybrid methodology, and then we're also going to look how within the same platform you could evolve to things like scaled agile framework. And that is going to be, there's not an entry in the community yet. We will be posting that in the near future. That's going to be next Wednesday on March 4th at noon Eastern. So thank you, Deborah.
Thanks, Claire, appreciate it. So then last, we'd love to be able to take any questions that anyone has. I'm thinking we'll do this in the chat window, I guess. So if you do have questions, we have a few minutes where we can stay on the line and answer any of those. Blair, I'm not sure, did you see any coming in?
Yeah, there's one out there that says, where do you set up when assessments get completed in the overall workflow of demand? And there is a business rule for the demand record called Create On-Demand Assessment, and that is triggered by the state change.
Perfect. We'll give a couple more minutes to see if there are any additional questions. John, Blair, feel free to chime in. And in addition, at the very end, we'll have one last question, polling question we'd like you to participate in. Just seeing how you felt overall about the webinar, whether it met your needs, basically whether your knowledge of ServiceNow Demand Management increased, stayed the same, or decreased, hopefully not.
So next question, once an idea is advanced to a demand, can users see the status from the portal? And the answer is yes. There's a composite field called stage that not only shows the status of the idea, it also shows the status of the demand and where it's at. And then it also shows the whatever entity that demand had turned into. So if it's a project, for example, you can see if it's pending, if it's in progress, or if it's closed out. So really, as John explained earlier, everyone in your entire organization has the ability to be that voice of the workforce. So everybody from that front end has the ability to see these things, where they go, where they evolve, even though they're not going to be directly involved as they move forward.
Great, awesome.
Since not all demands come from ideas, are the out-of-the-box methods for creating demands easily from other intake methods such as a request? I'm construing that just as, what happens if it's not coming from an idea. So we also have the ability to, and John explained an idea self-service. The demand record is also self-service as well, in that anybody could submit one. So it could be another service catalog request, or it could be a request that you create from the standard interface. Yeah, I think that covers it.
Great. Yeah, for some reason I'm not seeing the questions, so I appreciate you handling those for me, Blair.
Lisa is very quickly. You may need to click the Q&A box down at the bottom to have it pop up, but could be because Lisa's quickly moving in to answer it, so she doesn't have to hear me talk too much longer, I guess.
I'm clearing it so that we have more questions come in.
Okay.
I guess let me make one remark there. We want everybody to be able to see the end-to-end story, one source of truth, how all these processes could connect together. But that idea demand question is a great example. You don't have to create an idea, you could create a demand. If you were beyond the stage of planning and a demand, and you knew a project had to start tomorrow, you can go out and create a project. So all these things can be done standalone as well, but definitely we want you to be able to see the advantage of having them together in one synergy.
Awesome. Any more questions, Blair? I know we've got like 30 seconds, 60 seconds left. Well,
I'm not seeing any come through yet, but
okay.
you know, we always have the ability on the link that I provided early to post some more questions because this will be on demand and it'll be on the community link that I provided. And so if you have further questions, all of our experts today will be following that thread so that they will be there to answer your questions as they come in.
Perfect. Thanks, Lisa. And again, last, I guess that's about all the time we have. And in closing, I'd love to remind you to definitely subscribe to the ITBM forum on the community site. You can check out this webinar as well as please join us on March 26th, Thursday, March 26th, for the next in our series of Last Thursdays with ITBM. Again, that will be the Orlando overview. Everything you want to know about what's new in ITBM with the Orlando release. Right? And thank you all for coming. Thank you, John, Blair, and Lisa for participating.
We'll see you next time. Thanks.
Thank you.